Working, Michaela.
We're doing it as rehearsal.
Go ahead and ask the question. They can hear your audio.
What memories do you have of your father or mother during your childhood?
Well, I'm the first one.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Okay. You know, I was thinking I would hear everybody else. And
You're not going to have them start, are you? Now
We're
we're
rehearsing.
No, it's actually recording. It's working.
Oh, it's recording.
Oh.
It's working.
I thought you said it wasn't.
It started. I got it working.
Well, I remember my mom and dad, especially around Christmas time. I remember the Santa Claus that we had and how they would decorate the tree actually differently than we do. They used to decorate it at night, and then we would get up in the morning and we'd see the tree. We didn't see it. But since we've had our family, we've changed that tradition. I can remember my mom and dad getting us a dog and some rabbits and some pigeons, and they were all fun. And our dog used to herd and keep the rabbits on a piece of grass about this big. The rabbits would start off and the dog would go over and herd the rabbits back there. Yep. Yeah. And so those are a few things that I remember my mom and dad did for us.
Should I just?
Yeah, let's go around.
Well, the thing I thought about my mother is she was always cheerful. She never had a depressed day or anything like that, or if she did, nobody knew it. She sang around the house as she worked, and so she made our home cheerful. My dad always got up at 3 or 4 in the morning to go to the track to train the horses, so he wasn't around that much, so it was always wonderful when he came home. That's all.
That's all. Okay. I can remember with more amusement now than I did then. I guess I just thought, oh, well, how interesting. My father liked to eat hot peppers, and I can remember Mother complaining that when he kissed her, her lips burned.
Oh,
And then my dad always worked out on the lot. We had 2.5 acres, and so when it was dinner time, it was a chore to get him in there. And then I also remember how angry my mother was when my younger brother and I were wrestling on the kitchen floor, and we kicked a whole basket of eggs down the basement steps. And they were rough cement, so you just couldn't get it off. Oh, she was mad at us.
Well, some of the things that I remember about my mother and dad, there were just 2 of us in the family, and I was the oldest. My brother was 5 years younger, and I can remember most about after we moved into a house there on First Avenue, but my mother and dad were really hard workers, and mother especially was really involved with in the church work, and she was really side aggressive and had a lot to do with helping people in the community. And my dad, he they had a kind of a shop in our stake. And he would go, and the men would work and do things in that shop. So I can remember that they were really quite industrious and quite frugal and did a lot of things, but were very careful in the way they spent their money.
Well, two things about mother. One was that quite a bit at the time when I was young. She was having a lot of stomach difficulties. She ended up having stomach surgery and all that sort of thing. But I can remember coming home from school and she was doubled over like this a lot in pain. And I also remember the fact that when we went on an annual vacation to southern Utah where both of their parents lived. And Mother was very selective about who she wanted to stay with. If there was any tone at all that this was an imposition, boy, she wouldn't stay there. There was no way she would stay in the household. So we had set places we went, which were always fun. Dad was pretty impatient. We always had a lot of animals about in the place, particularly cats. And if any of them got in the way while he was walking, they got a boot. I mean, he wasn't going to tolerate.
Yeah, but he was also very apologetic. I didn't hear the whole story, but evidently one cat actually died because he kicked it too hard.
Oh,
And the word, I never knew what happened, but he was sorry he'd done it.
but he was hard work. He was always outside working.
You should hear the story about him when I was older. Mother was, I guess it was before she died, but we were around taking gifts to people. He used to take grapes and corn and just leave them for people, members and non-members. I never knew how he knew all of them. And we went to this one couple, and they offered us something to drink, and I said no, and Dad said, oh yeah, and they brought it out, and I kept nudging him and saying, Dad, that's liquor. He just took it and downed it, and I thought, gee, I wonder if I'm going to have to drive when we get here. It didn't faze him. I couldn't tell it had the slightest bit of difference, and it was a whole big, and it was, I think, whiskey. Because they asked him what he wanted, he said, oh, whiskey. And of course, he was just kidding, but they took it.
Hey, Rach.
What family traditions did your family have as you grew up?
On Memorial Day, we used to go to the cemetery and take flowers and clean up and I think that is a tradition maybe everywhere, but it seems like it's especially in Utah. We'll clean up the cemetery sites where our people were buried and take flowers there. And then another tradition was we used, as children, my mother used to always take us to the farm. And the home place, my grandfather owned 7 different places, one for each of the children. But there was also a home place, and that's where we always went. And we would help hoe the beets and feed the cows and go other animals, and then that was a great experience with animals and with farming. Those are 2 traditions that we had.
Well, we had all the usual traditions like at Thanksgiving and Christmas, but the things I remember the best were when we were traveling. And we had our dad more to ourselves at that time. And for instance, when we were at Del Mar in California, we would go to the beach together all the time. And he would read to us. We just had a trailer, and so he could lie in their bed and read, and Tracy and I could hear, and he read whole books through in the evenings to us that way. And then when we were in Chicago, we got to go to the movies that had stage plays along with them, big, really famous singers and things like that. Those are my best memories.
Stage plays with movies?
There was a movie, and then there was a stage play. I mean, a big performance, like a concert thing.
You took me to one of the theaters.
I showed you the Chicago theater.
we always wanted to get up at 5 in the morning. And,
Three.
or 3. That's when we were pretty little. And, parents, of course, didn't want to because they'd been up late at night trying to get everything ready. And so finally, the compromise was that, we had to eat breakfast before we opened all the presents, but we could get up, I think it was at 6, and open one present. And, that was a mighty decision. I can remember my mother being mad at me because the present I opened this one time had a lot of parts to it. She didn't think that was fair.
Well, the traditions that I could think of had to do with Christmas time too. And I remember we didn't have a lot of things for Christmas, and my mother seldom wrapped anything. You'd go to the tree and there everything would be under the tree. We didn't have much unwrapping to do, but several times we had did a sub for Santa as a family. Got several families and took them food, and I think I can remember those more vividly than some of the things that I got, except other than the time I got the Shirley Temple doll. Exciting. And I remember we used to, on Christmas, we'd go visit my dad's parents, my mother's family, sisters and that, didn't live in Utah, but we would go and visit Dad's family, the aunts and the uncles and the grandparents, and see the cousins. So pretty much the whole day would be spent just going and visiting people that were around.
My turn.
Mm-hmm.
One tradition we had that really affected me was that Mother washed every Monday morning. And in the house we lived in from the time I was about 11 until I went to Navy in 17, we all slept in one porch. It was where the wash facilities were. So my brother and I, our head of the bed was right against the washing machine and that sort of thing. So every morning at 5 o'clock on Monday, I would hear the washing machine going. A corollary to that was that one washing a week was fine because I don't remember, my memory is that I wore the same clothes all week long, 6 days, other than underwear and socks, but I didn't have a different shirt and different pair of pants for every other day of the week or anything like that. I just wore that, and then the Sunday clothing was different. So I don't recall ever having anything other than just 2 pairs of clothing, the weekday clothing and the Sunday clothing. And of course that was all quite washable in one wash for the 3 of us, the 5 of us. And it wasn't an automatic washer, it was the kind where you put them in and you run them through the ringer and all that. So, built into my memory of Monday morning, so I can sleep through early in the morning, any kind of noise, vibration.
Early training.
Hey, Ben?
Yep.
How about your school experiences, your favorite teachers, your favorite subjects, and why? What you did for recess or for extracurricular activities? Any recognition or awards you received?
Goodness, I didn't read the whole question.
You can answer the part you read.
Yeah, right. Well, I remember in junior high school, one teacher, I think, figured that I probably wasn't going to do very much in the science class. So he told me, Sipherd, if you'll write the final in this science class, that's all you'll have to do. And I thought, hey, that's a pretty good deal. But I didn't realize that he was going to review all the questions that I wrote and tell me whether they were any good or not. And I'd have to rewrite the questions. So during the semester, I think I learned a great deal more than anybody else. But I didn't have to take the final. Anyway, that was an interesting experience in my schooling. Sports, we went to lots of dances, and it seems like our children's generation, dancing kind of went out, and now with your generation, dancing seems to be coming back. And I think it's exciting. When I have two brothers, and we had dancing lessons, and then the big activity on the weekends in high school was dances. We would go to dances. Well, of course, sports events too. Is there any more on that one? Let's see.
Did you tell about being in the student body,
Oh,
residence?
in junior high and high school, both my brother Dave and I were secretary and treasurer, and then president, both of us, in junior high, and then in high school the same. And the funny thing that happened was when Dave was running for treasurer and I was running for president, I knew his talk, and I was going along with his talk when he was giving it, forgetting that I was going to have to give my talk next. And all of a sudden I realized, what on earth was I going to say, because I had been following Dave's talk. But we enjoyed the politics, I guess, of junior high school and high school, as well as the sports.
My favorite teachers that I can remember were the teachers who expressed confidence in me and were willing to let me do an assignment the way I saw fit, or kind of turned me loose to do my own thing. I can remember in the 4th grade, the teacher decided that I could draw people and animals. And so we were studying pioneers. This wasn't in Utah or anything, but we were studying pioneers. So she put up a paper around 2 walls of the schoolroom, and I drew the mural on these walls, and then all the other children colored in according to my directions. So we had covered wagons and oxen and horses and people. Then I remember another teacher in high school, and he was my drama teacher, and my friend told me something that he said about me that just gave me so much confidence. They were talking about something that I had done, and Mr. Simonson said, well, if Janice Tenney did it, then I know it was excellent. And for a shy person, that was really important. And I was in all the plays and extravaganzas and things like that. And I won the I was second in the dramatic declamation in the whole Citrus Belt League one year.
You see, she was in sand in her shoes when she was pregnant.
Stop that. That was college.
That was a little later.
I guess one of the teachers I remember was a student teacher in the 6th grade, and all the girls fell in love with him. He was tall and dark and very good looking. But a lot of the girls made a big fuss over him. I just worshipped him from afar. As far as subjects, I guess I enjoyed reading most, just because I like to read books. I guess I had decided that most reports were boring, and I had decided that we had to write a play about South America. Well, my fellow team members weren't too interested in that, so I was the one who wrote the play, but I was very gratified because when we finally read it, because they didn't have time to memorize it, the kids laughed, and I had tried to make it funny because I didn't want them to go to sleep. The only other recognition, I don't know whether anyone recognized me for that except me, but I was valedictorian in high school, and I was very unhappy about that because I knew that you had to give a speech, and I didn't want to give a speech. It wasn't that I couldn't, because you know, in church you had to give speeches, so I wasn't afraid of it, I just didn't want to do it. So I wasn't too pleased, and my uncle was very unhappy because I didn't tell him, because he loved to have people shine in the family, and so the fact that I didn't invite him to the graduation was a very sorry moment.
Do you remember what you said in your speech?
I was talking about the future of the high school and the fact that we have a swimming pool and all. I went into the principal and had all these interviews of what was going to happen, you know, to prepare for the speech and so on. But it was mainly the future of what was going to happen at Roosevelt High School.
I went to Roosevelt High School.
Oh, that's a famous
Probably
name
more
for
than
a-
two.
On South Cedar? No.
famous name for high school.
Well, most of the teachers that I remember, especially in grade school, they seemed to me quite old. And they were more kind of stern, but we did have a physical education teacher that was younger, and we really enjoyed her. And then we had a man, the only man teacher I can remember his name was Marion Merkley. And he came from Canada, and I think he was planning or hoping to be a seminary teacher, but had taken this job in the elementary school. And I really liked him, and I can't remember just what his subject was. He wasn't the homeroom teacher. He was one that I went to for some other subject, but he was just very pleasant, and I liked him. And he later became a seminary teacher at East High School, so I had him as a seminary teacher, and I really liked him. And he had a son, Guy Merkley, that I kind of had a crush on. When I was in 6th grade, he sat next to me, and I thought he was really neat, but his father was the one that I really liked. And I enjoyed writing, I think we called them compositions then. And I usually got A's on the ones that I wrote, and I actually found some that I had saved that was kind of interesting to read. Most of them were from high school and college. In fact, I had even thought about majoring in English, but I ended up not doing that. But anyway, we had to, there was some kind of building that they were doing a time capsule or something for, and we had to put what we wanted to do. And then years later, they opened that up, and I had in that time capsule that I wanted to be a scenario writer.
A scenario writer?
And I guess that was
Right.
I guess that was, now this was in Wasatch School, in the elementary school. And I think maybe part of it was because I went to quite a few movies when I was young, and going downtown to South Temple.
That's where I was born, in Holy Cross Hospital. Because when you said Wasatch.
That's where I was born too. But Wasatch School was on South Temple and about R Street. And now, then they had a tunnel that went underneath, and I took that went over to the places where they had ball. And I was really very good in athletics. And so I was, when they were choosing teams, I always figured, well, I'll be the last one that they choose. But it took me a while to learn how to, well, I never did really learn how to swim. But I did take it at the University of Utah. And my final was jumping off the board for the first time. And I think that was the only C I ever had. But as I've read some of the little brief diaries that we used to keep with just a line or two, it's been interesting to read. And we really went to a lot of movies in those days. I was quite surprised at how much we did. And we did a lot of things with friends. I had a group of real friends that we really enjoyed doing things together. And they came into my life more at the end of elementary school, and then we're on into junior high and high school.
My geometry teacher was also my German teacher. And geometry was easy for me, and I got good grades in geometry. German, I was always behind in terms of learning the vocabulary and all that stuff. Rarely was prepared. And I guess my geometry teacher felt if I could get A's in geometry, I must be able to pass German, because he gave me a C regardless of the fact that I never was prepared. It was years later when I took German in college that I began to pay attention to it, then I didn't.
McKenna?
Wait, there's a lot more than that.
Oh. Oh, as far as
What were
extracurricular
your favorite extracurricular activities?
Probably swimming
Tell them
and scouting.
about football.
Well, my mother didn't want me to play football, and because of her health, I was not willing to push it very hard.
I thought it was because you knocked your teeth out in the neighborhood football game, and so she didn't want you to play high
I
school.
think she just realized that it was a hazardous thing. But I was, the rough and tumble stuff was just exactly what I liked. And the PE teachers didn't pay attention to what you did when out in PE, so we organized, just pre-organized football games. And my bet, the thing I loved to do was get the ball and run it the hard as I could at the biggest group of kids I could. And I was doing this one day, I hit this kid and broke his collarbone. And he went screaming into his guys. Of course, they couldn't do anything about it because they hadn't paid attention to what we were doing. I did, in the locker room one day, I slipped and fell, hit my head, and had amnesia. Didn't know where I was, didn't know what was going on. I went on it and I kept asking, what are we doing? And finally it dawned on me when I was conscious. I was walking around, but I didn't know where I was or what I was doing. And the only memory I have is that I actually fell. The next memory I have is I'm sitting in the principal's office waiting for my mother to come pick me up, which was about 3 hours later, or 2 hours later. Whatever it took them to get wise up to the fact that I was out of it mentally. I didn't know what was going on.
So was geometry your favorite subject?
Well, any math, it just was, I liked the reading part of couldn't remember what the first chapter was. Too interested in going back to the discussion.
Did
So,
anybody have a nickname?
Mom,
is that in this one? That's
I think
what
you're
it
supposed
is.
to ask, it's their questions.
Yeah, that's the
Oh,
next.
I thought they already asked it, but no one said it.
Oh, no, yeah, we're only
The
on
next
only on
question.
your question.
Oh, whoops.
No,
Alright.
Good grief.
that's Michaela's question.
No, but I knew it wasn't that one, because I looked to see what the next one was, so I know what I was gonna
Hey,
say.
Michaela.
did you have a nickname? If so, how did you get it?
No,
And he dearly hated anybody who called him Johnny.
I'm with him.
That's why he didn't have a nickname. I had a nickname. My brother put J and T together and called me J. That's the only one.
well, and I guess you would be called Tennyson.
Oh, yes, I was called Tenny in high school just because, in college, it was college.
Last one.
I guess that happened, I don't know if it happens today. Are you called by your last name sometimes?
Not really.
Not very often.
In school,
They used to do that in our day. They used
Just
to,
a lot.
yeah.
I thought they did it some now too, but.
Well, they did when I was in high school. But maybe they don't. Maybe it's the football team that does it. I don't know.
You were on the football.
I had a
No, but
nickname in elementary
I didn't get
school
called
that I
Sipherd, Mike
hated.
did.
A nickname?
I had a nickname, and I don't even remember the name of the girl who gave it to me. I have no idea why, but she called me Lammy, and I hated it. And I told her that I didn't like it, and she just sort of completely ignored me, just kept on calling me that, so I didn't like her at all. And then when I was in college, I taught, I didn't teach, I worked in the cafeteria when we were up in the Sierras. We had a summer school up there from Fresno State. And we worked in the kitchen, and one of the fellows who was in the kitchen was this tall guy who just talked a constant stream. He was very funny. And he did the dishwashing and broke most of the dishes, I think. But, he had radio shows going on all the time he was washing the dishes, and he called me Two Gun Will. And I thought that was so funny, and I can remember when fall came and we were back in school, I was clear across the campus one day, and he was real tall. And I hear this, Two Gun Will! But I liked him, so I liked the name.
Well, Lammy? That would probably a form of endearment.
I wasn't endeared. In fact, it occurred to me that a lady I'm not particularly fond of now, she's super sweet, reminds me of that girl. And that's probably why I don't like the lady.
Which is hardly fair.
No, it's not fair at all.
Well, there were some people calling me Ruthie. And I can't remember who said that, but it was interesting when we were on our mission and we went back to visit one of the barrel Caesar. She called me Ruthie.
Oh, did you?
And I think after we were not sister, and I don't remember her calling me that, but I
There.
thought, oh, that's a name that others used to call me now.
My middle name is Wendell. And my father's first name was Frank, but his middle name was not Wendell, so I was not a junior. And so I think to distinguish, they just called me Wendell when I was a kid. Well, it turned into Wendy in school. I have no idea when it started or anything, but that's what I was all through my teenage years. And when I went into the Navy, I was typical of a 17-year-old. I was scared to death. I didn't know what was going on. I was really afraid of everything. And they said, "What's your first name?" I said, "Frank." Well, that very act turned it into Frank from then on. Everything, all my official papers, everything else was. And so I now know when anybody calls me Wendell or Wendy, there's somebody from Fresno. That's the clue. nobody else knows that.
Brett Gillian used to call him that for years.
Yeah, it was sort of automatic, but then after you go around,
I
people call
recently,
you Frank.
I had a, oh, I remember, I was calling my cousin in St. George, not St. George, Washington County, to get the address of another cousin whose name was unlisted, because we were gonna send him Christmas cards and stuff, and I was trying to update my address book, and he had lived in Las Vegas before he retired. So I called him on the phone, this is Frank Harmon, Provo, and so on, and he went, oh, good, I'll call Howard. When I got on, hi Wendy. So that all the people knew me when I was a kid, but I was Wendy.
Oh, my question. Okay. What was the hardest thing you remember about being a teenager?
School. That's the only thing I can think that was hard.
Okay.
I had to study. And I had a lot of homework. But I can't think of anything else that was hard.
Did you do your homework when you were told?
I always did my homework. Well, I had to work for my grades. School
We
wasn't.
didn't have a German teacher, it was a math teacher.
I was just terribly shy all my growing up years. I was so shy that I wanted to go to school every day because I thought it was fun, but I didn't want anybody to talk to me or look at me. And so when the teacher called the roll every day, I just went beet red when she called my name. Every day. It was just the most painful thing. And then once that was over with,
All right.
get on with it. But in high school, all those activities that I did with dance and drama and music really helped me appear less shy, and so then that helped me.
Yeah, I guess I was the same way. I reacted a little differently. I didn't get in anything. And I spent most of my time doing schoolwork and being a good student and so on. But I can remember that in church, you weren't worrying about grades or anything like that. And the thing that bothered me was that I had no idea how to interact with boys. And there weren't very many. There weren't very many members of the church. And so I never did learn how to do that.
Except with that tall guy that washed the dishes.
Oh, well, he did that with everybody, but he would have been a fun one, yeah, that's true.
Well, I was on the shy side too. Part of it, I think, was because of my eye condition, that I was, just kind of felt uncomfortable because I could, when I looked at people, they didn't know I was looking at them because my eye went a different way. But I
You use that to advantage.
Didn't think about that.
it wasn't when I was in the Relief Society presidency and trying to get acquainted with these new young marrieds that were living in our ward, and they wouldn't know who I was looking at when I didn't know their name, and
You get the point.
they would know who I was pointing to. But, well, a lot of my friends were quite musical, and I, they were in the acapella choir and different things, but I did decide to try out for the Glee Club, and I got into that Glee Club It was
Chorus
a
is
song.
Chorus.
Chorus.
Oh, oh.
But the big thing to be in was the acapella choir. And I didn't make it into that.
And
I know I wasn't a very good singer anyway, so.
most of our social life in our family was centered around church, and church was all over Fresno. In fact, most of the population of the church was on the other side of town from where we lived. We lived about 10 miles from the chapel. And so I really wasn't very socially involved in high school. And I had an high school English teacher who came to me one day and said, would you ask so-and-so, there was a cute little girl in my class who wanted to go to the junior prom. Why don't you ask her to go to the junior prom? She really wants to go. I don't want to be fair. And this teacher was one who influenced a little more than most because I paid enough attention to her. And so I finally got up the courage to ask her, which was very, very hard to do. And then as soon as I did, I regretted it. I did not want to go to that junior prom. I was really feeling terrible. Well, the day before the junior prom, I was in high school, and I went into the restroom and looked in the mirror, and I had the measles. My face was covered with white spots. And so I didn't go back to school, and I will never believe that I had the measles. Sure, she thought I ducked out, and of course, I was glad I had it. Exactly.
Well, Ruth said something about singing. I can tell you a story about my singing.
What is it?
When I was in junior high school, our music teacher would have us line up around the room and then go down the row having you sing individually. And so when I saw her coming down here, I ducked back into the coat closet and would go down this way and come out as she
It passed that point.
passed me. And if she ever heard me sing, she finally decided, I think it would be good if Sipherd were in taking care of the backstage. And so I got out of music class because I think my voice was too low for anybody, plus I couldn't carry a tune. And so I spent my time during music class preparing the backstage sets for the stage activities. One day she caught me doing that. Had me come out and do something. And another thing in that music class, you had to do musical things to get points to get the grades. So I had a friend that could just play the piano fantastically. And so I got with him and I said, now, you play this piece and let me do the run on the keys. And I'll do the run. And so he was playing the piece and I did the run and I went boom, boom, boom.
Even muffed up.
Yeah, I couldn't even do the run good.
Hey, Ben.
What was the most historic event that took place during your generation? How did it affect you?
World War II, I guess, and the moonwalk. Let's see. Well,
You mean Michael Jackson moonwalk?
And World War II, I can tell you one thing, the way it affected me, was my uncle fought in the South Pacific for almost the entire war. And he had gone to the draft board and said, take me, but don't take my brother, because he's needed on the farm. And so they said, okay. And so he went and he fought the Japanese for almost the entire war, 3 or 4 years. And he came home and he had these, I can remember as a child, when we go to the farm, we'd hear him wake up screaming and yelling. He'd have these horrible nightmares.
Wasn't he a sniper?
Yeah, he would have to go in and clean up after, well, he'd get the snipers.
Oh.
The Japanese, we would take an island in the Pacific, and then he would come in and help finish taking it, because the Japanese would dig in and hide, and even though the island may be 90% taken, there was still Japanese. In fact, many, many, many years after the war, some of those Japanese still thought the war was going on. But he'd have to go through the jungles and so forth and get these snipers that were hidden in the jungle trees and so forth. He came home and he could hold a gun like this, only it would shake, but he could still hit a, we had old, do you remember the trawling tokens in Salt Lake? They had a hole in the middle from, from here to the apple trees out there. He could enlarge the hole. But he would get it on when he was crossing it because he was shaking.
And he shot a pheasant right in the eye, and he said he got him in the eye, and they went and looked at it, and sure enough.
But that's,
So you remember how that affected your uncle?
yeah, that was pretty hard. And one other thing though that was really interesting about that war. Before he left for the war, he had a Japanese farmer that he let do some, what we call truck farming. A small plot of land, but that Japanese just grew phenomenal vegetables and so forth. And when he came back from the war, he still had that Japanese man there, and he didn't seem to hold any grudge or any animosity or any meanness toward the Japanese, even though he'd seen men go out, and he would tell his officers, don't send this guy out anymore, he'll crack. And they'd send him out and they'd crack. He ended his life working at the Veterans Hospital, helping people at the Veterans Hospital. But so the World War II was a big event, but I thought the moonwalk was a big event too.
Well, that is Pearl Harbor, I really do remember. My mother told me about it. I was 4 going on 5, or 5 going on 6, I haven't figured that out. Anyway, I can remember her talking about it, and then I ran as fast as I could, about 2 blocks to where my friend lived, and told her all about it. I felt so important telling about this big news. And I can remember our victory garden that we had, and also mixing the margarine. We'd get a bag like this of margarine, and it had inside a little pellet, yellow pellet. You had to pop that pellet and then knead it all through there to make it look like butter. It just came white. And then I can remember the end of the war. We were in Chicago, and we were right out on the sidewalk, and we knew that it was the signing and everything, the treaty was imminent. And suddenly, all over Chicago, all the bells, all the horns and whistles, and then all the cars started honking. And we knew that it was the end of the war.
Wow.
just didn't have a lot of money as a result of the depression. It was interesting to see in Mother's life story that she wrote. She told about my dad building homes and you know, losing money in the depression, but they moved into a house that he had built, and we figured that they were in their 30s, didn't we? That they moved into, and it was all paid for in his 30s.
Wow.
And about, and that was right, it would be soon after that that the depression came, and he didn't get the money that he had for another building. So that affected our lifestyle.
So having the house paid for, helping survive, no, we didn't lose the house, obviously, you had no payments on it, right?
Yeah, that, but they still, he wasn't getting the work
Right.
that he needed to keep going, and about the time I was 5, then he started buying, rather than doing new homes, he bought old homes and then remodeled them and made apartments, and that was when we, that's the part that I remember most about. I was 5 when we moved into this house that he was in the midst of remodeling into apartments. And then he worked for another man for a lot of years that had a lot of property, and he helped keep it up.
I turned 16 2 weeks before Pearl Harbor. And Pearl Harbor was on Sunday, and we were coming home from church. And we always picked up a Sunday paper when we came home from church. When we went into the drugstore to pick up the Sunday paper, here was the headline, Pearl Harbor. And of course, it pretty drastically affected our lifestyle because our church was roughly 10 miles away, and from gas registering, we only had 4 gallons a week to use. That was our allotment. If you were a salesman or had some farm or something, more gasoline, but for regular people, you only had 4 gallons a week, and it pretty much took all 4 gallons to get to church and back the number of times we went. So my father rode his bicycle to work, and I rode my bicycle wherever I went. And, so I never did. Here I was all ready to have dates with a car.
I'm not sure I'd buy the date part.
Yeah.
Well, actually, my social life was church. And there was a girl over in the other part of town that I dated. And so what I would do is the Fresno is laid out along the railroad, at least the business part of Fresno is along the railroad, which is diagonal to the north, south, east, and west stuff. So I could almost get to church as fast on my bicycle as the folks could drive, because they had to go out this way and then over this way, and I just went diagonally across town. I was a fast bicycle. I had a really good bicycle, and could ignore stoplights and street lights and things like that. I could get over to my girlfriend's house almost as fast as I could drive a car. One night, however, I was driving along, and I generally drove without hands. I was just, the seat was high, and I was just driving along. It was on this dark street. It was a diagonal street, and I hit something, I have no idea what, but I just rolled. And when I got up, my bicycle forks were bent back so far that the wheel wouldn't turn anymore without going around. So I walked it back to my house, and Dad gave me the car for the only time that I had it. And when I took the bicycle in to get it repaired, it was really the best bicycle made on the market at that time. I remember I paid $40 for it. It was the top of the line bicycle. And the guy says, "I can't believe it." He said, I can't see how you hit anything hard enough to bend these forks like that. And of course, I had no idea what to do. But of course, fortunately, I just rode down the street. So it wasn't I would bicycle over, park the bicycle at my girlfriend's house, and then we'd take the bus downtown, see a movie, and then we'd go back, and then I'd bicycle home.
Must
Hear that, Ben?
Swing.
What? What'd you say?
Said you hear that, Ben?
Must have been a Schwinn or something like that.
No, there's a guy in Provo who collects them.
Oh, really?
They're very expensive bicycles now. I can't remember the name of it, but it was a very expensive bicycle for that. It was a US made bicycle, wasn't a Schwinn. It was fairly lightweight. And I could really, of course, we didn't have a lot of hills. It wasn't a multi-speed bicycle, but it was built for touring, so it had a big sprocket that you could go pretty fast on it.
Yes, it used to frustrate me to death if I rode to school with him, because my bicycle didn't have that, and I'd be going like this.
But he had to push really hard.
Yeah, you had to get work to get up to speed, but once you got up to speed, actually the streets we rode on in the summertime, were tar, and it got hot enough in Fresno that tar got so that when you rode a bicycle down the hot hard street, you left the track in the street. It was soft stuff.
Oh, what's that?
Wasn't it?
See, that's Michaela's. 7, Michaela?
Tired?
Which one is that?
7.
No, that's the last question.
Historic event. So 7.
Who asked that though?
Oh, Ben did.
So she just doesn't have a seat. Dad, Ben asked this one. Then. Nobody but someone else. 7. I think she's so good to one.
So I just do 7, Michaela.
What was it about your spouse that was attractive?
What was it about your spouse that most attracted you?
I didn't understand that one. I haven't gotten a read from it.
What was it about your spouse
You took
that
my
most
coffee. Oh,
attracted?
well, I don't need it, I just wondered what he did with my coffee.
None you now.
Okay, have you asked that question?
Yep. What was it about your spouse that most attracted you?
Okay. Well, first, she was a member of the church. I knew that. Because I lived in Seattle and all I had dated was non-members. So that was a big attraction. Beauty, dance, and sports.
What about him?
She couldn't do any of them? No.
She's
Yes.
good at all those.
She was beautiful, and she was a dancer, and she liked sports, and I liked the athletic female. I like femininity too, but I also like some,
A little strength.
well,
Tomboy, he's kind of like tomboy.
yeah. So that's, okay.
Well, it was his athletic good looks and his kind of take charge attitude, his interest in architecture, and then also his apparent love of the church.
That it? Well, my husband was a convert, and so that, there weren't a whole lot of eligible men any place I've ever been. But he's a convert, and so that helped. And of course, social life was centered around church. I guess the other thing was that he was just an interesting person. He was a photographer, and he had been to Europe, and he had done all of these things, and just interesting to be around, interesting conversationalist. Had a much bigger vocabulary than most people I ever knew. He used to call about 10:30 at night, and he called me by a name like, Sweet Lollipop. It was never the same. My roommates couldn't get over it. They said he never uses the same one twice. I can't even remember what they were.
Well, when I first met Frank, it was washing dishes in the mission home. Probably the first time well, I don't know that that was exactly the first, but anyway, I was serving as the secretary to Sister Doxy in the mission office, and we lived in a building. We had rooms up above where we slept, and he came in. I had been there for several months, and the first time I met him, I think it was over at we were right next to the chapel there, and I can sort of visualize him. First time I saw him was in the cultural hall there. But in the mission home, the missionaries had to do, help with the dishes and clean up and set the table and help with the cooking and that sort of thing. And so we had, we were every day we had meals together, and their office was not too far from us, where the lady missionaries were. And I was, impressed with his, we had a study group in the morning, and I was impressed with his knowledge of the gospel and the way he expressed himself. And also he was tall, and he had really pretty curly hair then. But, and he was fun. We had quite a bit of opportunity to wash dishes together, and he was kind of a tease, and I just thought he was pleasant and good to be with, and had qualities that I was looking for.
Let's see.
We never really had a first date.
They're not to that yet.
Yeah.
I suppose her spirituality and her desire to be a strong, good missionary were qualities that attracted me. I had gone out about a month after she went out, and one of the missionaries that I went out with was a very good violinist, and a lot of fun to be around, and I was kind of impressed with her. And I never wrote her or anything, and I really followed the rules in terms I never let anybody know my emotions on those kinds of things. And so I did write in my diary sometime towards the period when I was in mission home that I was becoming less and less attracted to Sister So-and-so and more attracted to Sister Rockwood. Of course, she didn't know that.
Now, where was the mission?
Eastern States, Philadelphia. We were in the mission home was in Philadelphia. I was called into the mission home. The only thing that makes sense is that because I had none of the skills of an office person. I had never taken a typing class. I didn't know any of those kinds of things. I read lots of books and didn't pay attention to how people punctuated or did any of those kinds of things. Were worried about spelling or that stuff was beneath my interest. And President Doxy called me to be the mission secretary, or that is, I took care of all supplies, getting supplies out to the missionaries. And my handwriting was bad enough that I had to figure out how to type, and I just typed, it's just hunt and peck, and I had to work fast because there was a lot of work to do. While I was there, the mission ran out of Books of Mormon. The church apparently was right after the war, and they hadn't kept track of 3 months, we had no Books of Mormon.
Oh, my goodness.
And so we had back orders of 400 or 500 of them. And so I had to keep track of all that kind of stuff, and I was constantly writing postcards and letters to people, and it was a mission joke, my letters, because I didn't have time to fool around, going around correcting mistakes. Just if whatever my finger hit, I did it, and they could understand what I was saying, but it was a standing joke to get a postcard from Miller Harmon. And eventually the Books of Mormon came in, and but they didn't come in enough quantity to fill the whole need, so then I had to split every order and keep track of all that stuff. I really worked the clock around for a long while as the mission secretary.
Oh, one thing that happened was when I left the mission office to go to Niagara Falls, I had bought a lot of books, and so they wouldn't let me take them on my ticket to Niagara Falls, so he said that he would send these books home for me. And so later on, when I was in Niagara Falls, I got this letter from him, and he said the postage was such and such, and the cost of handling was the indefinite number of dates when he came to. That was the only letter I had while I was on my mission, but when I got home, there was a letter waiting for me, and then we had quite a few other letters.
Oh, that's good.
Okay, one more question and then we're done
For tonight.
tonight. Yeah. Right?
They've gone to sleep, maybe you better stop now.
Do you remember what you did on your first date with your spouse? What was it?
We went to a dance.
At BYU?
Yeah. Went to a dance. It was at the social hall.
Would you like to add anything to that?
Yes, it was a sock hop. It was in the afternoon, and literally you took your shoes off and you danced in your socks. And then after that, he took me to where there was a house being built and took me through this. It was had the what do you call it?
Right?
Studs up, framing, yeah. And I was so impressed. Well, the new wood smelled so good, and he told me this would be the plumbing, this would be the living room. I was just really impressed that he knew all that.
That was Smith's house.
Really? Wilford?
Wilford Smith's house.
Oh.
Oh, that's the house you took him to?
Our neighborhood.
Yeah,
Up on Aspen?
yeah. And Wilford.
No, he wasn't on Aspen, he was on
Or Ash?
Ash.
Yeah.
And I can remember when I left school that year, I had bought a door for a drafting table. And I took it up, gave it to him, and he used it in the house.
Well, I don't know that you'd call it a date. We were both in the choir, and he had asked me to shorten some curtains that he'd had in the studio, but he wanted them for his apartment. And so I did that, and I thought, okay, that's it. And then he wanted to know if I would make the leftover material into a bedspread. I'd never made a bedspread. But my father had always impressed me with the fact that I could do anything, and I believed him. And so I took my sewing machine over to his apartment and literally pinned this stuff on the bed. The only thing I knew about making a bedspread was that you needed a cording around there, so I did that, and then I pinned it on. And it took longer, well, it took quite a while. It was so late when I got through that I took a taxi home, and I think the taxi driver thought that I was just leaving my lover's apartment because he was very talkative and I was so sleepy I couldn't hardly function. I finally got home. And I guess that was the first date.
Was this in Fresno?
No,
New York.
Oh, New York. New York.
Yeah, it confused you.
So did you have a first date?
Well,
We obviously had one, but neither of us can remember what it was.
Pretty memorable,
Well,
huh?
What happened that set stage that created problems for our first few dates was that in that, as Ruth was released before our annual Palmyra conference, and I was still in the mission home, had a lot of work to do connected with running the conference, because I was part of President Doxey's staff. And and I had aspirations to spend some time chatting with her, because she was not released and I could go more often. Well, she was just busy, and here and there, and I don't even remember why, but I remember coming away from that thing very frustrated that I hadn't had that chance to have this conversation. So I go back to the mission home and write this letter that's quite a bit more serious than anything that I've done before, that's a little more open about how I was feeling. And so she responds kind of cautiously, okay. But then I wrote, like every month or so until I got off on mission. So that kind of set the stage for dates that were leading someplace, and we didn't know what to do in that context. And after 3 or 4 dates, we were getting quite uncomfortable with what was happening, because we weren't ready to be serious, but we were still both interested in each other. Finally, we agreed after how many dates. We don't even remember what we did. Whether we went to shows or I have no idea. But we finally decided, well, what we better do is stay apart from each other 3 or 4 days, 3 days or something like that, and then before I go on the front. See, I was on my way home from my mission, and it was just in early December, and so we did that, and then we got back together and had a fish up, went to the temple visit, and it kind of developed into a pretty serious thing. And from then on, the letters were a foregone conclusion of where we were going, but we were kind of following the mission rule. We shouldn't get too serious until after 6 months after your mission or something. And so we said, well, we won't make a commitment, we'll just. And on top of that, she had quite a few missionaries who were coming home to see her, and so I went home and was so busy trying to find a job and going to school and whatnot that I didn't have much time for that. But I came back at conference time in April, and that's when we got engaged. Got married in September.
when I left the mission office to go up to Niagara Falls, the President Sister Doxey and Frank drove me to the station, and then they just left. President Sister Doxey left and said for him to see me off and take care of my luggage.
So they were aware
No,
of that at all?
there's no way he could have had any clues at all. But we concluded that when we became aware of all of this is when she had a really decided to describe her courtship. So she was reading all this stuff she was reading in her journal, and I started reading whatever I'd written, which wasn't much, and it suddenly dawned on me, he was setting us up.
She was really the matchmaker, but she didn't have anything.
He was very, very businesslike. And then the thing that really made me fully aware of it, partly was the fact that he let me there alone. Of course, I just thought, well, I better carry her luggage, and we did have this brief conversation before she left for Niagara Falls. When she got released, he brought her in and they had the usual conversation, and then he said, now you need to settle down, find a husband, somebody like over Harmon. And she had put this in her journal, and I thought, holy smoke, I wish I'd have known that. I would have liked to ask him if he was intentional or not, but of course he's dead by the time we're doing all this. By the time we're going through all this stuff, we don't have any, but it was pretty clear to me that he was setting us up.
Oh, that's interesting.
It's
Now,
really like-
Doxey, why do I know the name Doxey?
Well, he wrote a lot of stuff about Doctrine and Covenants, and he later became after being a religion professor on BYU campus for many, many, many years, he became a kind of a speechwriter and researcher for the general authorities whenever they were trying to write on some difficult topic. He would gather the data for them and kind of help them write their speech or something.
I guess that's why I know.
But he was a religion professor at BYU from 19.
He wrote the Relief Society
I was released in '48, but
theology lessons.
he was released about, I guess, 3 or 4 months before I was released. So I had George Q. Morris as a mission president for several months. But he immediately went to BYU and became a religion professor. So from '48 to whenever he retired was probably in the early '80s.
Well, he was in his 40s when he was a mission president.
Yeah, he was pretty young, had a young family.
So.
But I wish I'd have done this research so I could have asked him the questions. Did you set this up? But I can't.
You'll ask him someday.
Yeah.
Families and posterity came about through those decisions.
Yeah, that's right.
When Janice was talking about what happened at the end of World War II, I was recovering from appendicitis in the hospital 114 in the Philippines. And I had the only radio in the hospital that would run off of AC. Because most the hospitals didn't provide those kinds of things, and I was in a radio out supply department, and he brought me an AC radio. And so, as soon as the atomic bomb was dropped, then my bunk became central headquarters for the whole hospital. And I was let out of the hospital before everything was kind of finalized. So here my division officer comes, picks me up in a Jeep, and takes the radio away.